Hi everyone. So today I've got a fun one. We are going to be investigating and exploring a makeup mystery. So where has this mystery come from? I've had quite a few messages recently and emails asking me if I own a particular lipstick that came up at auction a couple of years ago, just over 2 years ago, that was owned by Marilyn Monroe. And I have replied to all of them saying, yes, I do own that lipstick. And it's not the first Marilyn-owned lipstick that I've bought, but it's certainly the most intriguing. And it's the one that has been really, I guess, the most exciting in terms of it holds a whole universe of possibilities. Now, the actual lipstick itself is an Elizabeth Arden one. Now, we know that she wore a lot of Elizabeth Arden colours, and this particular lipstick certainly looks very well used by her. And we know through all the photoplay magazines and all the different interviews with her makeup artists over the years, you know, which shades of Revlon she wore, which shades of Coty she wore, and so on and so forth, because there's a lot of documentation. However, what really made me extra excited about this one was that it is a lab sample. Now, as someone that spends a lot of time in makeup labs, when you have a sample we call making a colour on the bench, so it's not a mass-produced colour, it's when you make a one-off colour. So maybe you are thinking about making a colour and you make this first kind of version before you kind of scale it up and mass-produce it. And this is actually exactly that. This is a lab sample. So it's a completely unique one-off lipstick. And you can imagine how excited I was about that. And also the message on the label had me bowled over. It's typed, it says, orange pink, like Miss I, sample 05022, May 2nd, 1960. So, like Miss I. Is she trying to look like this Miss I? Who is Miss I? Is it a character that she's going to play? Is it somebody that she admires and she wants to emulate? And then it also has the code for the lab samples. So that's something that we have still today. We have a code for all the lab samples that we create. And then it also has the date. So it has the 2nd of May, 1960, which also had me completely intrigued. And I'll explain why. The other thing that really got me in the images was the colour. Firstly, I recognised, yes, it's quite a typical colour for 1960 in that it had a lot of titanium in, a lot of white pigment. But I could see it contained a bromo acid, specifically D&C21, as well as the pigment Orange Lake 5. And that's something that would fade. So I thought that combined with what looks like Orange Lake 5, which is now a really restricted pigment, but I do have it here. I thought I'm going to be able to recreate that colour and imagine how it would have looked. When I imagined how it would have looked, so imagine it without the fading, I instantly thought of the Misfits, because there's an amazing image of her that Eve Arnold took that I had a book of, and I was always so intrigued by this one photograph, because obviously the Misfits is a black and white movie, so you don't really see what her lipstick colour looks like in that. But Eve Arnold, who is the photographer that went and did photography on set, took a set of images, and one of them, you really see the makeup very clearly. My husband is extremely knowledgeable about the history of photography and actually commissioned Eve Arnold once. In his opinion, the colours in this image are true to life. As for example, her white shirt actually still looks white, which is a very good indicator the makeup is true to life too. So this one image really made me think, gosh, the timing is right for the Misfits, 1960 May. I'll get to it in a minute, kind of like how my mind was racing basically before the auction on the possibilities. So to cut a long story short, I had to have it. Once I'd actually bought it, it took a while for it to arrive, and then when it arrived, it was a completely crazy time for me. So at the time, I mean, I looked at it and was like, wow, oh my God, amazing. But then I put it into safe storage and I didn't see it for about another 4 months. When I got it out, I was like, okay, I need to solve this mystery. Who is Miss I? And I felt like this is going to take a long time and a lot of real deep research. Obviously, I was looking at the colour, I was thinking about the pigments that could be in it, and I was thinking about the type of people I could contact that could help me with researching the pigments, but also starting to think about who is this Miss I? So the first thing I did was contact the archives and archivist at Elizabeth Arden in New York. They actually didn't have any information at all. Anyway, I drew a blank, hit a dead end, and realised that I was not going to get any answers from Elizabeth Arden, sadly, because that would have been the easy route. If they'd have had it all listed down and maybe had some notes about who Miss I was or what the lipstick was created for, obviously it would have made the journey a lot quicker. So to kick off the search for Miss I went through every biography, every letter, every mention of her, every interview, models, actresses, it girls, socialites, theatre characters, theatre actresses, friends, colleagues, co-stars, her entourage, you name it, I've searched for it. Finally started narrowing it down a bit, got down to about 19, 20 names. I then got it down, and ended up with 3 of my main suspects. Suspect number 1, the most famous I at the time, the beautiful Ingrid Bergman. She certainly would have been moving in the same circles as Marilyn. They're both absolute legends of the golden age of Hollywood. Ingrid was really known as a very serious actress, and that was something that at that time Marilyn was really aspiring to be, because by 1960, Ingrid Bergman had been nominated for 5 Oscars and received 2, whereas shockingly, Marilyn had been snubbed, so had not been nominated or received any Oscars. Multiple sources do suggest that Marilyn held Ingrid in high regard, often referring to her as one of the beacons of Hollywood. A good example of this would be an interview that appeared in Morris Zolotov's biography. It's an interview that she did in Japan, and she was asked who were her top people, her most respectable people that she admired in Hollywood, and she did mention Ingrid's name. So it kind of makes sense that she could want to emulate her look, and maybe she did take inspiration from her lipstick. However, I hit a dead end on this one, simply because I contacted Isabella Rossellini, who's Ingrid's daughter and who is a friend of mine. Isabella told me that Ingrid didn't know Marilyn personally, and she also said, and thought this was really interesting, my mama wore a pink, more of a skin-toned pink lipstick. I do not remember the brand. It could have also been Elizabeth Arden, but she wore very little makeup, just a little base and a little skin colour and mascara. That is it. She was really known for that simple, natural kind of beauty look. So it was more of a natural pink. So this orangey pink that we see is definitely not something that Ingrid wore herself. So then I thought, well, maybe was the colour a more fashion girl take on the Ingrid Bergman colour? But it's so different to it that, in my opinion, it's not Ingrid. On to suspect number 2. This is a bit of a wild card, but it really warranted a bit of a look. This is Inga Stevens. She was a Swedish actress. She made her film debut in 1958 with Bing Crosby in the movie Man on Fire. There is this publicity shot from The World, the Flesh and the Devil that she starred in opposite Harry Belafonte, and you can see it definitely is that orangey, pinky coral shade. I mean, it was a very popular kind of colour anyway at that time, but when you look at quite a lot of her images, you do see that it was a colour that she did wear. Inga was in Photoplay magazine a lot at that time, as was Marilyn, and she went to a lot of the events that Marilyn went to, so she certainly could have noticed her in a magazine or at an event and clocked the lip colour. Inga and Marilyn were also intertwined in some other interesting ways as well. Inga took acting lessons with Lee Strasberg, and she also visited Dr. Ralph Greenson, who famously treated Marilyn in the years leading up to her death. Who knows, they could have seen each other in the waiting room or just passed each other on the stairs. Inga was sadly hounded by the tabloids, who extensively covered her struggles with mental health, and very tragically, she died of an overdose in 1970. So, in conclusion, was Inga Miss I? Whilst nothing completely rules her out, in my opinion, no, because I have a much stronger number 1 suspect. So my final suspect for now is, well, we all know that the relationship between Marilyn and her makeup artist, Alan Whitey Snyder. I did a video, I think in 2011 or something, about their relationship and how many years they spent together and working together. But there was also Marie Irvine, who was based in New York and was known as her East Coast makeup artist. Now, I think this is something that as a makeup artist, I really relate to, because obviously I'm based in Europe and I do a lot of celebrities that then have another makeup artist that will be based in America or in LA. And sometimes I have good relationships with those makeup artists because they'll say, oh, you're doing her for this or you're doing her for that. So it's just a world that I kind of recognize and I feel quite close to. Two of the reasons that I really felt that Marie could be a prime suspect is that firstly, she had worked at Elizabeth Arden and their labs were famously in Long Island. And secondly, she really started working with Marilyn kind of later in her life, later in her career. First meeting her in 1958 for a beautiful shoot with Richard Avedon in New York, or Richard Avedon's studio in New York. And secondly, I mean, I guess most famously, she did her makeup for the Happy Birthday, Mr. President performance in Madison Square Garden in 1962. I mean, how iconic is that to be responsible for that makeup? Despite having such an incredible role in makeup history, she was far less talked about or known, I guess, than Whitey was. And it was only really just before her death that Erin Parsons actually introduced her to that TikTok generation, and she kind of got her flowers really before she died. And that's something that I think is just so important to recognize these people. So yeah, I feel very team Marie, but was she Miss I, or could she have been Miss I? So what's my case for Marie? Firstly, she's Miss I, Irvine. She was married at this time, but there's lots of receipts in the public domain where you can see that she's Marie Irvine. So technically, she was still using that name, Marie Irvine. So she is still Miss I. Secondly, she had worked at Elizabeth Arden. So she probably still would have contacts there. She might be able to get them to make makeup for her in her capacity as a makeup artist. You know, sometimes I ask labs to make me special colours for shoots or for clients. That does happen. That does still happen today. My theory is that Marie Irvine was doing makeup tests for the Misfits on Marilyn on the 17th of July. In terms of this lipstick saying, like Miss I, it could have been, who knows, that they'd had a conversation prior to it and Marilyn had said, oh, I'd love a lipstick kind of similar colour to what you wear or what you're wearing maybe one day. That happens with my clients all the time. Sometimes when I'm doing their makeup, they'll be like, oh, what colour are you wearing on your lips? Oh, I'd like something like that. That does happen. Or it's just that, you know, Marilyn has said, I want something which is kind of orangey or orangey pink. It was obviously a very fashionable colour at the time. And when they printed out the label at the lab, instead of writing for Miss I, they've typed like Miss I. Who knows? It could have just been as simple as a typo. And most compelling is that the hair, makeup and costume tests were happening throughout June and July for the Misfits and in New York. And this makeup session, there's a receipt or an invoice rather from Marie to Marilyn Monroe for makeup services in the New York apartment on July the 17th. So we know that she was having her makeup done. I think it was part of the makeup tests for the Misfits, having her makeup done by Marie on that day. On the 18th, the following day, she flew to LA and then off to the set of the Misfits. And to top it all off, a second invoice Marie sent on the same day shows she sent 12 Leichner eyeshadows to Reno, Nevada. And where was the Misfits filmed? Reno, Nevada. So this feels extremely compelling. In terms of this actual colour, once I'd really analysed this colour myself, I took it to several chemists because I wanted to be so sure that I was on the right track with the pigments that were used. I was convinced it was Orange Lake 5 and bromide acid DNC 21. You know when you buy those lipsticks that say they're pH colours, they're basically either one or there's two types of these particular bromides that give you that slight stain to your lips. They're almost a little bit fluorescent. I was convinced that one of those was in there just because of the way it looks and the way it's faded. Anyway, I spoke to chemists in Italy, chemists here. I also went to a lab in New York and very close to where the Elizabeth Arden lab used to be, that also used the same chemical supplier, which still exists, by the way, that supplied the Elizabeth Arden labs back in the 60s when this lipstick would have been made. And I kind of had a mixture of opinions, but everyone said, yes, it's Orange Lake 5, which, as I say, is very restricted, and this particular eosine, which is this dye. I've made my own version of this using the exact pigments that I believe it was made of, but also all of the experts I've spoken to. Actually, one of the experts was someone that was working close to that time, and she remembers working with some of those really restricted pigments. So I feel like the due diligence has been done on what this lipstick was actually made of, including the lanolin and the different oils that they use. So pigment-wise, I ended up with titanium dioxide white, red 6, yellow 5, orange lake 5, and bromo 21. Exactly what they would have used at that time. And it was really interesting because, as you can see, it's created a colour which is similar to the lipstick that I own, but it's not faded anymore. And when I compared that to this image, this Eve Arnold image on the set of The Misfits, I was blown away. I had chills. I thought that, oh my God, that is that colour. And it literally brought me out in goosebumps. So this is the reproduction of the shade using historically accurate ingredients. Certainly, I feel we're very blessed today with lipstick because it doesn't feel too nice. But do you know what? It's not too bad either. It feels creamy. It feels, I thought it was going to be chalkier than that, but it really isn't. It's definitely orange though. Definitely orange. And I'd say that's about spot on. You do see that Marilyn has more lip liner than I've got on. So if I was to go around with an orange lip liner, I feel it would look more accurately her. So in conclusion, this is a historically accurate recreation of the colour that I own, the lipstick that I own. And I have a hunch that this was one of the shades in the Misfits or used in the Misfits. Of course, there was more than one colour used, I'm sure. And Marie Irvine, she's in the right place at the right time. I do think that she was involved in those makeup tests for the Misfits. She had those connections with Elizabeth Arden and the labs. And I don't know, it just all feels it just gels. So for now, she is my Miss I. But if you have any more information, please come forward as I would love to hear it. See you soon.